I rode motorcycles in my childhood, and it really brings back a lot of good memories when I think about it. And for that reason, this season I decided to buy a dirt bike that I could take on the trails, ride around with my wife in the forest and the off-highway vehicle parks. I got her this little XR100 here that I kind of restored, kind of just fixed up. If you're interested in that, you can see the link right here. And that's only half the battle though. I needed something for myself. So if you watch my other videos about my YZ426 that I picked up a few weeks ago, you'll know that despite the fact that the previous owner told me that it was titled and registered, turns out it wasn't. It was kind of like a ghost bike. It was there in my garage, but it had no papers. It was an alien. It was an alien dirt bike. So I went round and round and round with DMV trying to get title for it, but I just couldn't. You can watch the other videos right here if you're interested in seeing how that whole episode transpired. I ended up getting the bike running really well, but without a sticker to ride it in public places, it's pretty much useless because I don't have a whole lot of property to ride on in my personal property. So, not discouraged, and knowing that the clock was ticking, I really needed to get a dirt bike before summer's over and it's rainy and bad weather again, I scoured Craigslist and I found this. This is a 2002 YZ426F, which is pretty much the same bike as the 2001 I was working on before, with a couple of significant exceptions. One negative thing about this bike is it has very low compression and hardly runs. If you'll notice here, on this Kickstarter, I can kick it through its entire cycle here just with my hand, which is bad news on these bikes. I should be able to stand and jump up and down on this on the compression stroke, and it should just stay there. That's why they have this decompression lever here, is because it has so much compression. So something's definitely wrong with the top end of that engine, and we'll address that shortly. But the main positive aspect of this bike is the fact that it has a title right there. So a clean California title is definitely a positive, and something that I didn't have with the last motorcycle. The negative is that the engine could be blown, but when you're working with the kind of money situation that I have, which is not very much, you kind of get what you can. I didn't spend a lot on this motorcycle. I spent $600 on it, which that could end up being a really good deal if I can fix the motor cheap, or it could just be a waste of money. I may take a bath on this one. So what I'm going to do now is I want to dig in to this engine. I've already done a little bit of diagnostics on it, and I think that the problem is that on the compression stroke, when it should have all that compression, the air is leaking past the intake valves. This is what I suspect the problem is, because when I get the engine to the compression stroke here, right there, and I listen through the air box right here, I can hear air escaping. Let me see if I can do it here to demonstrate. I don't know if you heard that or not, but I listened to it pretty closely with my ear next to this air box. It looked like I was loving and caressing my motorcycle while I was doing it, but all funny business aside, I think that's what the problem is. So what I'm going to do is take off the shrouds, the seat, and this nice oversized aftermarket gas tank, so I can get into the engine here and see what's going on. I'll start with the shrouds here. I've got the radiator shrouds off now. So this seat looks like it takes a 13 millimeter, so we'll take that off next. Seat off. And next, we'll take off the tank. I'll release this little rubber clip right here, and I've also taken the fuel line off, and I think that's all that's holding this thing on. I thought there were some bolts somewhere, but it seems pretty floppy. Yeah, that's it. Interesting. So we'll take this off. Oh, it looks like there is a place for a bolt there. It was just missing. So, as with most of my projects, it looks like this one has been taken apart before. Probably the previous owner knows what's wrong with it and had just taken it apart and said, I'm not messing with this can of worms, and decided to sell it to the next sucker. Oh yeah, look at this. That has been taken off before. I can tell by the wear in those Allen screws. But oh well. I'll start taking this thing down a little more. I need to get all this junk out of the way so I can remove this cam cover, valve cover. I've got most of the junk out of the way here so I can access the top of the engine. I took off this motor mount and disconnected the wires so I can take this top cover off. Just kind of as a last prayer, I checked to see if the spark plug might be loose inside there. That would be nice if the only reason it had low compression was a loose spark plug, but I wasn't that lucky, so I continued taking parts off. And I've gotten the bolts out that hold this cover on, so now I'll just remove it. I've never looked inside one of these engines before, so I don't really know exactly what I'll be looking at, but I do know that if the intake valve is adjusted too tight, it can cause the symptoms that this bike is displaying, and that would be really a lucky break for me. So that's what I'm hoping for. So let's take this off. I don't know if I'm doing this right. Oh, this is in the way. This is a remote hot start cable here. That's an aftermarket feature. So here we are, valve cover removed, and I can see the camshafts. It looks like here's one camshaft lobe and then the others are under this cover here. This one is closed, so I'll check to see if this little bucket here, or whatever you call it, is loose, because if this valve is too tight, that'll cause my low compression, and I can actually move the little valve lifter, valve bucket I think it's called. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's loose enough that it wouldn't cause the low compression. So that one I don't think is the problem. Now I just need to figure out about the ones underneath here. So apparently there's a tool made to check the clearance between this cam lobe and the part underneath here. It's called a feeler gauge. So what I'll do here is put the feeler gauge under there. I'm not specific on the thickness. I just want to see if there is some room there. And right here, yeah, that one looks good. So that one isn't sticking open. And then the other one between here, yeah, I can slide that through, and might even be able to see it there on the other side. You can see that feeler gauge there. So let's try this third one. So far this isn't looking so good. But you can tell, see, when I kick this over, when I get to the compression stroke, right there, and then kick a little more, hear that? That's bad. That's air coming back up through the intake. So let's hope for this third one here. Oh, hey. Now that's tight in there. I can't push my feeler gauge in between the cam lobe and the bucket. So I think I might have just diagnosed my problem here. I wonder what I can do to verify. I know, I'll loosen these bolts just a little bit to the point that I can stick the feeler gauge in there, and then kick it over here again, see if the compression changes a little bit. Bad idea? Maybe, but that's okay. So I'm not going to take these all the way out. I'm just going to loosen them enough that I can get the feeler gauge under that last one over there. I don't want anything to come loose like the cam chain. I don't want it to jump a tooth there or anything. I'm excited. This could be my lucky day. I've loosened up the bolts on this camshaft cap enough that I can now get my .127 feeler gauge in between the camshaft lobe and that bucket, and I had to raise it up quite a bit. If you look here, you can see the space there between the head and that cap. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm hoping somebody just put it together with the wrong shim in there, and that's the problem, rather than a worn valve seat, but that's just speculation at this point. Now let's just see what the compression looks like. If it's still got low compression, I will be a discouraged fellow. Oh, hey, that's much better. I actually could still get it past the stroke. I don't know why that would be, but definitely much better. So there, I can still push it through if I try, but it's not leaking any air through the intake. See, I'm pushing it through right now, and I'm not hearing anything out there. So I think what I'll do is I'll take this cap off and see what shim is underneath there, because that's how you adjust these. You just put little shims, I've been told, underneath those buckets, and that's adjusts the valves where they need to be. So I'll do that. I think what I'll do also is just check the exhaust valve clearance here, make sure they're all in spec, or not in spec as much as not too tight. I should probably find out what the correct clearance is. Okay, that one feels good. There's only 2 on the exhaust, 3 on the intake. Okay, now this one, I wonder if we have the same trouble over here. See, I can't even fit a .005 inch, .127 millimeter in there. I should really see what the correct number is. I'll just put the thinnest one I have in there. So after looking through my choices on the feeler gauge, the thinnest one I have is .002 inch, .051 millimeter, which the spec on this has to be bigger than that, so this should definitely go through there. And it does not. So we've got the same issue, folks, on the exhaust as well. It's amazing this thing ran at all. So I'll pop off this one a little bit and then see what the compression looks like. It worries me that it's been running, though, without this valve seating, because that could burn a valve. Quick primer on internal combustion engines. A lot of the cooling of the valve is done when it touches the head, when it comes back up. See, those hot gases in the combustion chamber transfer to that valve, and unless it touches something relatively cool, in this case the head, on that valve seat, it can burn, which is bad. So if there's not enough clearance here and the valve never touches the head, which is what's happening here, it can burn a valve. So don't want to jump to any terrible conclusions, but that's a real possibility, folks. I've got the bolts on this loosened up enough now that I can get the feeler gauge in there between the lobe, like that. So now it should have good compression if my calculations are correct. That's pretty good. There's the compression stroke. That's not great, but I think it's still worth adjusting the valves to within spec and seeing what happens. I just had an idea. I think before I take these caps off, I'm going to measure the clearance of the valves with the caps on, just to get a reference of the clearances that I can get the feeler gauge into. I'm doing this because there's a possibility maybe somebody took this thing apart and then put it back together with the shims all mixed up, and that could be my problem. I might not even have to buy shims. That's a long shot, but I thought it would still be handy to gauge the clearance here before, and that way I'll have a starting point. So I've got it all tightened down again, and just to show you with it tightened down, see, I can just kick it right through. So if this isn't all of my problem with this bike, it's definitely a contributing factor. I've gone through and got the measurements for the valves here. Here's my diagram: exhaust, intake, and there's, see, 2 exhaust, 3 intakes, and that's the front of the bike. I even put the Kickstarter down here so I'd know what I was looking at. And this exhaust and this intake are the two that are too tight, so I put T's there. Then the other ones are 0.254 millimeter, 0.305 millimeter, and 0.305 millimeter. So next it's into the research facility, also known as my office, to see what the correct readings should be there, and I'll also take off these cam covers to see what shims are in there already. I did some checking on the internet here, and it looks like the correct specs for the valves on the intake side are 0.150 millimeter to 0.200 millimeters. So these are actually a little bit looser than they should be, and it looks like the exhaust is just right where it should be, or maybe a hair loose. It's 0.305, and the spec is 0.250 to 0.300. And again, the way these valves work is that as they wear, the clearances actually get tighter. So the fact that they're loose means that something funky is going on. I got the camshaft covers off over here, along with the cam chain tensioner, which goes on the side of the engine right here. These are pretty cool camshafts. They have roller bearings here, which I've never seen before. One thing to watch out for that I really screwed up on already, though, is there are these little alignment circular clips that go here in these bearings. There's 2 of them. You'll notice I only have one here at my workstation. The other one somehow fell down there. So that's something I'll have to address before this project is through. Luckily, I have an extendable magnet that hopefully I can fish it out with. But the next step is to get these camshafts out. I'm just going to tie the cam chain up here somewhere with some wire to keep it from falling down into the engine, and then I'll go to work both taking the caps off these valves and fishing out my lost part there. I was able to remove both camshafts and fish out my lost part with the help of my antenna magnet. I don't know what I would have done if I couldn't get to it. I'd probably have to just turn the motorcycle upside down and shake it or something. So next step, remove these Five Guys right here. I like a Five Guys hamburger. That's tasty. Hamburger and French fries. I was able to remove this first bucket and shim. This is the intake valve that was too tight, and here's what it looks like. There's the shim in there, and it's sat like that on top of the valve. What I'll do next is remove the rest of these buckets, and I'm thinking maybe somebody had this apart and then reinstalled the shims in the wrong positions, and that's why maybe some of the valves are too loose and some of them are too tight. So I'll just remove everything and measure it and see if I can't play a little bit of musical valve shims to bring everything back where it needs to be. To remove these buckets, I'm using some needle nose pliers that I wrapped in masking tape, and I'm able to just grab them and pull them out without scratching them, theoretically anyway. So just like that. I have removed all of the buckets and shims from the head of the dirt bike, and I found that the shims are all different sizes. The buckets are pretty consistent in thickness, but the shims are different. This valve, the intake valve that was too tight, has a 1.8 millimeter shim, and this one has a 1.6 millimeter, and this one has a 1.5 millimeter. And I also noticed that this one didn't have any markings on it, but these two both say hot cams on them, so these are aftermarket shims, and this one is either a different brand or maybe it's the factory one. So I think what I'll do now is I'll just mix and match and try to bring everything close to where it needs to be. Well, I've done some mixing and matching, and I couldn't find a combination of bucket and shim to fit every valve in the motor and have the clearances come out right. So what I did was the two thickest shims, the 1.8 millimeters, I took some sandpaper and a file, and I got those little shims down to where they needed to be. I just shaved off a few hundredths of a millimeter at a time, and I made them really smooth with some 800 grit sandpaper so they won't screw anything up in the engine. And now I think that everything should go back together and the valves should be at the proper tolerances. I have reinstalled the bucket and shim assemblies and the camshafts. I coated everything with a layer of grease so that upon the initial startup it'll have some lubrication in there. I'm also working on timing the camshafts. The way that I believe you're supposed to time these motorcycles is I'm supposed to look in this hole down here, and there's a little mark on the flywheel, maybe we can see it, and that mark is supposed to line up with the little notch in the case. So let me see if I can get a good shot. There, you can kind of see it. See that little hash mark in the flywheels lined up with the case? So that means it's at top dead center, and when the flywheel is aligned right there, this dot right here and this dot over here on the camshafts should both be even with the top of the head right here. So I think I have it matched up the way it should be. So the next thing I'll do is install the camshaft caps, and then I'll install the cam chain tensioner. I've got my camshaft covers reinstalled. When I tighten these bolts, I made sure to tighten them in a crisscross pattern, little by little, rather than just torquing down one at a time. And on the topic of torque, You're supposed to tighten these to 7 foot-pounds of torque. Unfortunately, I don't have a torque wrench, but I just kind of went with my gut. I knew that these are small bolts in aluminum, so it needs to be tighter than a nut driver, but not so tight as a 3-foot-long breaker bar on there. So I just used a little 1/4-inch drive ratchet and tightened them to what I felt was right. I know that doesn't meet Yamaha factory specifications, but it definitely is within the range of the Geftob methodology, which is, as you know, good enough for this old boy. So the next thing I need to do is check these with a feeler gauge to make sure they're within spec, and if that checks out, I'll put this cover back on and button everything up. Everything's now tightened down, and would you believe it? These are all within spec. Now, to install that cam chain tensioner, there's a trick. You need to take out the bolt on the end of it here, and then use a small screwdriver to turn this little screw in the end here, and by doing that, it brings it in. So what I think I'll do is I'll start it into the side of the head here, making sure to install the right side up, and as I can feel it starting to get tight, then I'll screw this in little by little so that it will easily press into the head where it belongs, or cylinder rather. I've tightened these 2 bolts, keeping pressure on this tensioner screw the whole time, and now I can remove the screwdriver, and that lets the tension out on it to tighten up this chain. So now I just need to reinstall this cap screw that goes in the end here. So the tensioner is installed. I've rechecked the cam timing with this little mark down here, and that looks good. Now I just need to reinstall this decompression lever that I pulled out, and then reinstall this top cover here. I have the valve cover installed on the engine, along with the wiring and this head stay right here. So I believe all that I have left to do is install the gas tank, shrouds, and seat. I also need to install this little bolt right here that keeps the decompression shaft in place. I've got the gas tank installed and the fuel line attached. I even went the extra mile and bolted on the gas tank to the frame. I think before I install the shrouds and the seat though, I think I'll see if this thing will start. That way, if something goes terribly wrong, I won't have to remove so much to tear it back down. As I was installing the fuel line, I noticed that I had installed this guy upside down though. So I turned that around. Kind of makes me wonder what else I screwed up unknowingly in there. Well, we'll find out shortly. Well, I went out to try to start this bike, and the first thing I noticed when I turned the gas on was a big puddle of fuel coming out the bottom of the carburetor, which means that the needle valve is stuck open, probably by some junk in there. So I have to take the carburetor apart and clean it. On the plus side though, remember how when I began this project the compression was like this? Well, now there is quite a difference. That's how it should be. So, big difference right there. I can put all my weight on it, and I don't know if that's as good as it was when it was new, but it's definitely what you would expect from a bike like this. The minute you think you've got something figured out, turns out you don't. I thought that the problem was the needle valve here into the seat. Turns out the seat was clean on the inside here where the needle valve goes. However, on the other side, we see a lot of dirt and the culprit of my leak, an O-ring that's old and brittle, which was allowing gas to escape here between this valve seat and the main case of the carburetor. I got this needle seat back where it belongs with my O-ring that I found around the shop. It was a little bit thicker than the factory O-ring, so I had to use some, let's say, finesse to push that valve seat back where it goes. I've got my carburetor installed again, and let's see what the result is. So there's some evidence that it actually runs. Unfortunately, I've run into a couple more problems with this beast. It looks like I have a leak under here. Looks like I have a bad water pump seal. There's water dripping out of this hole right here. And to top things off, I've got an oil leak. I've got oil coming down the side of the case here, and it looks like it's originating. Let's see if we can see it right here. See how that gasket's all funny? I don't know what the history behind that is, but oil is getting past that seal and then running down the side of the case and leaking out here. So I've got an oil leak and a water leak that I need to address. So I think I'll take a break on it for now, but at least it runs and it's got good compression. So just a few minor tweaks and we should be in business. Thanks for watching.